everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Handling Verbatim Comments in Your Engagement Survey, How to Walk the Tightrope Between Insight and Confidentiality. My name is Natalie Varanya, and I am the Marketing Specialist here at TalentMap, and I will be your webinar host today. So I'm here with Norm Bailey-David, TalentMap Senior Vice President of Engagement. For our clients joining us today, you probably already know Norm. He is TalentMap's in-house expert in workforce measurement and employee experiences. With over 30 years of experience in research strategy, consulting, and workshop facilitation skills, Norm works closely with our clients to help them really understand their employee survey data to improve their workplace. Welcome, Norm.
Thanks, Natalie. Glad to be aboard.
Perfect. So for today's agenda, once I'm done with all the formal introductions, Norm will start us off with why we've chosen the topic and the types of questions we receive in relation to employee survey comments. Then he'll look into the important role this feedback plays in employee engagement. And finally, he'll discuss the problems many HR professionals run into when handling verbatim comments, such as juggling insight and confidentiality along with appropriate solutions. So we'll also reserve the last 20 minutes for some Q&A. For the Q&A, you can submit your question at any point during the webinar using the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. I will keep a list of questions as they come in for the end of the presentation, and if we're unable to respond to your question due to time limitations, I'll be sure to follow up by email. So before we jump right in, for those who are not familiar with TalentMap, I wanted to give a quick overview of who we are and what we do. TalentMap is a trusted advisor in employee engagement and surveying. We have been in business for over 18 years, and in those years, we have conducted more than 7,000 employee engagement survey projects. Each year, we survey over 1 million employees across more than 500 organizations. At TalentMap, we have one focus, and that's to partner with organizations to improve their workplaces. So to do this, we use three core elements. First, we ensure you ask the right questions when launching a full employee engagement survey or a pull survey, an entry-exit survey, or 360 survey. Secondly, we uncover valuable employee insights by diving deep into the data and really analyzing your results. And lastly, what makes TalentMap truly unique among our competitors is that we stick it out and make sure you act on your survey results to make real change in your workforce through effective action planning and additional post-survey consulting services. So as you can see from this sample, we've worked with a number of clients across North America and in a number of sectors. With our years of experience, we have established comprehensive industry benchmarks to put our clients' survey results in the context of their competitive marketplace. So now that you know a little bit more about TalentMap, let's get started. So over to you, Norm.
Thanks a lot, Natalie. First of all, a hearty welcome to all of you, not only in North America, but now increasingly around the world. We have participants signing in from South Africa, from New Zealand, and from other points. So welcome everybody, and especially if your time zone isn't exactly conducive to doing this during your workday, we even appreciate your participation even more. So why the topic? Why talk about verbatim comments? It sounds like something that could be, it's pretty technical survey stuff, dreary, open-ended comments, very much for the technician. But in actual fact, there's a lot of philosophical questions behind this, and more than that, real ethical questions that we have to grapple with. And I think that's probably the reason so many of you have registered and are attending today, is simply that you're facing some of these questions. And we're going to refer over the course of the next 30, 40 minutes or so to the conundrum of employee comments. Why we're doing the topic is because we get questions about this on a daily basis. Will my manager see my comments? Do we distribute the comments? Who's going to receive the comments? Why do employees answer that way? I've heard managers are seeing my comments. I don't really believe you. It's confidential. I need to see what people have said to do to do a proper action plan, and so on and so forth. It really creates a lot of angst. And we have to walk a tightrope. As is in the title of today's webinar, it really is a tightrope that we have to walk, because as you're going to see in the next few slides, it's something that survey would be of very limited insight if we didn't have them. But at the same time, we have to do our utmost to make sure that the comments that are provided to us in confidence remain so. So then the whole subject of today's webinar is, well, how do we do that? And I want to start with talking about a little bit, giving you a picture of why open-ended questions in general and verbatim comments, which are the answers to those questions, are so important. Because there are many organizations out there, many surveys that are conducted, and we've seen them. I've been around for 30 plus years. Those of you who know me know that. Essentially, a lot of people try to skirt this issue by saying, oh, well, we're not going to do comments this time. Or, if comments take too long, they're too hard to analyze. We're just going to, and we can't deal with this issue of confidentiality, so we're just going to ask the scale questions. And so what I want to show you is a little bit of what you're losing when you sort of skip this and try to take a little bit of the easy way out. So, why we do the open-ended questions in a survey to begin with is because we need those detailed and nuanced responses. A survey is designed as such and have been designed as such since the first surveys were designed in the 1930s as a way to aggregate or count the opinions of a large number of people. And so scale questions, the Likert scale questions that you're all very used to by now, have become second nature in questionnaires. The agree to disagree, I'm satisfied versus not satisfied, and everything in between. Those are the ways that we can derive statistics and turn attitudes into mathematical equations and statistics that we can compile and then extrapolate over a large number of people. But in doing just that, what we lose out is the detail and the nuance. And I'll show you an example of exactly how that works in a second. The second thing that the necessity of these open-ended questions is it allows employees to freely express themselves, especially those who, and we see this in a number of sectors too, particularly very highly educated individuals, for example, higher education, in healthcare and medicine, in law. Folks don't like to be constrained by the, ticking a box on an attitude statement, even though that's the easiest way that we can get a measure of an attitude. It's constraining for many people. And because of that, surveys have become, or had become in the past tense, they got a bad rep, basically, because a lot of people said, well, I can't really answer that question. My answer is more nuanced. I'm more of an individual than these surveys letting me be. So those open-ended comments are so important because they provide an avenue for individuals to express themselves. Of course, when you see the responses to the questions, many people get frustrated because they create more questions than they answer. And so the open-ended comments, the verbatim comments, provide that better understanding of why employees answer in a certain way. And as you're going to see, that's exactly how we use them here at Talmud. They provide that context and insight. And most important of all, they provide the avenues not to give you all the answers. That's not the way we're going to use comments. It's to start conversations. It shows us the way to start a meaningful conversation with a group of individuals about an issue of concern or of strength. So here's an example. I want you to look at this slide, and I want you to essentially interpret it for me in your head. What do you conclude from these results? This is something that we've taken from a recent survey that we've done and these are the scale questions around senior leadership behaviors. So the green boxes, for those of you who are not familiar with our surveys, represent the folks who agree or strongly agree on those scales to those issues. The blue in the middle represent the folks who neither agree nor disagree, and the orange represents the folks who disagree or strongly disagree with those statements. And so when you're looking at this with just this information, you're going to see, at least the way I think, how do we interpret this? People are afraid to say what they think. Is that why there's so many people who neither agree nor disagree? it doesn't look good for senior leadership here. Obviously, they've got a problem. They don't communicate goals well. It's whatever way you tend to look at this slide, you're going to start to interpret this slide based on essentially the low number of people in the green, the relatively high number of people in the orange, and of course the very high number of people in blue. Any way you look at it, and of course you got the benchmarks comparisons as well, it don't look good, does it? It don't look good at all for that senior leadership group. So you could say that, well, these folks are in a bad way. But then, and this is the way we use in our verbatim comments, we look at the comments. We read the comments to see what people are saying about senior leadership that they've written in open text. And here's an example. Well, when you start reading these comments and you start seeing comment after comment like this, we're in an early phase working with the new CEO. Oh, the CEO's new. Well, I didn't know that from this slide. The CEO is new. Okay. I feel under this leadership and together with senior managers, they'll set realistic goals. However, we're not at that point yet. Employees, like many other respondents, are very hesitant to put a stake in the ground. Undecided is a very, very comfortable place to be. And so when we see in this particular case, the CEO is new. They haven't made a decision. Nobody is clear on this shared vision. Leadership doesn't appear to have gelled as a team. Hence, you have the most people answering, well, I neither agree nor disagree. Well, nor can they, because now we know the senior leadership has not gelled yet. It's a new CEO. This is a new team, and people are holding their vote. Of course, having looked at this slide before, you wouldn't have been able to come to that conclusion. But it's crucial, and it really alters the way that we look at senior leadership in the context of employee engagement. More importantly, it has a direct bearing on what we're going to do about it, right? So I'm not sending this senior leadership off to training and leadership development programs. What I'm doing is essentially figuring out ways that this new CEO can get him or herself known better, known quicker, and gel as a team in a quicker way to reduce that neutral. So you can now see how crucial the comments are. So by ignoring them or by evading them or by not taking them into account for fear of breaching anonymity and confidentiality, we could be making a huge mistake when we interpret the data. So why then is there such a conundrum about this? Of course, you probably have a good answer to that because you're on the other line listening to me and you have these same questions. So why the conundrum? Because we go out of our way to, at the beginning of every survey, to reassure employees that their responses will not be seen on an individual basis by anybody at their organization. So, and we make commitments to them, and those commitments are underwritten by membership in different organizations. If you don't work with TalentMap, you should make sure that if you do work with an external vendor, that they are members of either CASRO in the United States or the Insights Association in North America, or MRIA here in Canada. For my participants working abroad outside North America, then you should be looking for ESOMAR membership. So essentially, we guarantee that individual responses won't be seen unless they're aggregated in a group of 5 or 10. So that's fine for the scale questions. When you look at the scale questions and you see there's at least 5 people, more often 10 people in those groups, very difficult to see how many people, for example, in our senior leadership group said that they don't set goals or that they don't have trust and confidence. You can't really figure out who's who. You don't have enough insights to go on. However, when we're talking about verbatim comments, we're in different territory entirely. And what we need to do is we need to begin with 2 basic fundamental truths. Now, you may not agree with me on these, but I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never seen a case where one or the other has proven me wrong or proven that these truths do not hold. Truth number 1, employees will, whether they realize it or not, out themselves. What do I mean by that? What I mean essentially is you're going to have some employees, and we see this in each and every one of the thousands of surveys that we do, in the in the act of expressing themselves, their concerns, their worries, their feelings, to make it individual, they refer to a situation or a condition so specific that anybody who works anywhere near this person reading that comment will be able to make a very good educated guess as to who that might be. So even though there is no name, there is no reference to other people, or sometimes no reference to other people, the employee themselves has sabotaged their own anonymity by being so explicit. Now, we can do warnings and caveats, and we do prior to the survey, but what you're doing essentially is employees, some want to do this, by the way. They want to make themselves heard, and they don't really care that they will be identified, but we don't make that distinction. So we have to go under the assumption, and that assumption for me is a truth, that some employees are going to out themselves through their own comments. The second part, the second truth, is managers and other employees, but what we have to worry about here most is managers will always try and guess who said what. And essentially, you can see, I'm going to show you a quote, really. I mean, I could take one of these. It was really easy for me to find one of these. I just looked at the latest survey that we did, pulled out, started reading a few quotes, and bingo, bango, there we go. Here, I mean, it's a little bit long, so I'm going to keep this on the slide a little bit. And it's not uncommon. You might think I'm really trying to sort of shock and awe here, but this is something when we usually have a percentage of comments that are like this. So let's go through this. You know, I have nothing to say here, starts the person. But you can see by the length of the comment that that person indeed did have something to say. I find my job is very stressful. Management listens to only one individual on my team because she has worked with the client organization, which will remain nameless, for 33 years. She's mean and abusive and acts like a bully. Work is piled on us. The fax machine doesn't work. There was hostility towards us because of our pay grade and the fact that the worker has worked for this client for 33 years. She threw a huge temper tantrum during the first day because she's lost her underground parking and prestige at the old building. The team lead for the area program that I assist is useless. I hate coming to work. I've worked for this organization for 10 years. I've never completed a survey until today. What's wrong with this quote? It's very honest, isn't it? What's wrong with this quote is there are a number of user characterizations that will identify the individual. Essentially, you can, identifying someone who's worked on their team for 33 years, she works around, she's the one complaining about the fax machine. It's so specific that anybody who's working around this person is going to make an educated guess as to who that person is. There are no names here. There are no descriptors. There is no department. There is no division. There is no team. There's no location. But the situation is so specific that it's recognizable. And so many other things about this comment leads one to believe, and this is very typical, this is how the employee is outing themselves. So how do we protect that person against themselves? Essentially, that's what we're trying to do in this exercise, right? So keep this in mind, because I'm going to come back to this quote when we talk about the solutions. And of course, the number two is, and if you're in an HR position, if you are the holder to the key of the employee survey, as I believe, and having looked at the registration list, many of you are, and I know many of you, or have met many of you, you're going to come up with this you're going to hear a lot of what's on this slide. The first thing is you'll always hear right up from senior leadership, right on down, oh, you know what? We're not going to find out who it is. We're not going to guess who it is. Don't worry about that. I really need to know what my people said. My group is different from the rest of the organization, so I need to see their comments. You know what? I already know what they think. Nothing's going to surprise me now, and so on, and so on, and so on. And you're going to get those pressures. And what do you do with those pressures when it's your superiors that are making these statements? And they truly believe it too. I mean, I'm not saying that they're lying. Absolutely not. These folks actually believe what they're saying. And so too do they believe in their heart of hearts that they can look at the comments and not try to figure out who that is. But if you go back to this and you read that comment or something very similar to it, how could you not? Just ask yourself that question. How could you not? It is human instinct to put a face to that quote. And that's what's going on. So this is beyond the individual's rational capability to exercise that. It is beyond that capability because human nature is such that that person, that manager, will paint a picture. And this is what we do when we read a novel. We paint a picture of the characters in our heads, which is wonderful for our imagination. Terrible if we're reading verbatim comments. How do we then, this is the conundrum that we solve. How do we reap the necessary insights? And you see how necessary they were. Without them, we can't make definitive or proper conclusions or assessments about what the data is telling us. But at the same time, how do we protect someone, especially who's writing something so explicit, so specific, that anybody or most people would be able to guess? So that's essentially the question before us. And so I'm sure some of you, and I'm hoping you'll share some of this in your questions box in your comments a little bit later. I don't pretend to have all the answers. Talamat doesn't pretend to have all the answers. But over the years, what we have developed is a way to walk this tightrope that works pretty well. It really does straddle both sides. And we start with essentially an approach, a philosophy, if you will, that first of all, we need to have open-ended questions and the verbatim comments that are the result of those questions to allow people to express themselves, to understand the why behind the scale answers. So we're not going to hide behind the issue of confidentiality and anonymity. And we want to protect the individual, but at the same time, the price is too high in terms of insight to ignore completely. However, protecting, once we do that, once we understand that we need to reap those insights, so we're making a call here, yes to open-ended questions, yes to verbatim comments. Protecting anonymity, the employee's anonymity, trumps everything. Once we've got those comments in hand, we have to do everything in our power to protect that anonymity. The question now, so the answer to that, therefore, what we do first is we recommend, if you're doing it and you're working with another vendor, of course, this is our recommendation to you. What we're doing here on our end, we start with the responses to all the questions. We read all the comments and we provide anonymous illustrative comments and comment themes for all to see. So I'm just going to flip you back to an example, which was here. This is how we go about it. So in the case of this senior leadership question, once we see what the statistics are telling us, and so the view from the aggregate is overall 29% of this organization's employees are favorable, 46% are neutral, 26% are unfavorable. We need to know why. So what we do here to give our clients, to give the reader to an understanding of why people are answering this, we ourselves at Talent Map will go through all the questions, all the comments, pardon me. And as we're going through that and reading it in a certain way, and I'll get to that certain way in a couple of minutes, as we're doing that, and as anybody does that, if they do it properly, you will notice and you will be struck by themes, commonalities, tendencies, and trends in the way people are answering this question. And here's an example of that. So we illustrate those tendencies or trends through specific comments. Why don't we just, a lot of people say, well, why don't you just aggregate the comments? And the reason why we don't aggregate we do aggregate the comments. So, sorry, I should have mentioned that. There is a step here. I don't have a slide to show it, but we do actually aggregate the comments in the sense that we allow individuals to tick off one of a number of categories. So in this particular case, new CEO would be one category. Nobody's clear on a shared vision, need more communication. The trouble with that process is to get those categories to a manageable size, anywhere between 8 to 10 categories. You have those categories now become so generic that you lose the insight that you're looking for. The categories become important when you see the individual quotes themselves, and then you can say, okay, 40% of the comments are talking about a new CEO, more than any other percent. So you can see the size of that. And so there you have essentially what we're working with. But here, when it's what the power, the insight comes from an emotional connection that the reader has with what people are saying. And it's through the actual verbatim comment that we need that. So that's why we prefer to work with the actual quote from the survey, because somebody reading this from their organization will identify with this. There will be a connection, a bond, because they live it as well. So this is why in the report itself, we're going to clip out a number of anonymous, obviously, comments that are not situation-based, not specific, or only identifying the same individual that everybody knows in the organization, who is the CEO. And so there's really no way to identify those individuals. And then basically that's for all to see. So in the reporting, everybody should see that quote, and it will give them the color commentary around the statistics to understand why so many people are answering in neutral. So that's what we're doing. We do that for all of the drivers of engagement. So you see, we're straddling that line. Now, next becomes the question of who sees all the comments. And so we have to be very judicious here. And so what we recommend, and of course you may or may not agree, but this is the approach that we found has worked the best, is we restrict, or we recommend that the distribution of the comments be restricted to two groups. Number one, the HR sponsors of the survey. So obviously we can hold the comments to ourselves here at TalentMap and on our database, which you as a client own, but we are the custodians of, to protect the individual responses. But HR, somebody on the client side, should have access to the comments to gain the same insight that we're gaining, right? So, and the HR, usually it's HR, the sponsors of the survey are most often those folks that will entrust, and we hope will entrust, with all of the comments, right? We're not breaking them down. And so why HR? Well, there's two reasons. First of all, they're usually the sponsors of the survey internally at their organization. But more importantly, HR departments are very adept at holding confidential information on employees. That's what you do every day. Their employee files are confidential, people, and HR are pretty good at it in terms of maintaining the confidentiality. And of course, there are standards and there are ethics, codes of ethics that are adhered to by members of the relevant HR associations, such as the HRPA or HRMA. In Canada, the SHRM in the United States, etc. So the next group is the leadership team, the senior leadership team. How and why the senior leader? Why should the senior leadership team see the comments? Well, the senior leadership team are this is the group of individuals that run that organization. They have a right to see and can command the right to see what everybody says, but not what one individual says, right? To glean those insights. So how then do we straddle that? Well, we recommend that everybody gets everything. So if you've got a senior leadership table and you've got your CEO and you got your CFO and you got your CTO and you got your CMO, what we would recommend is that everybody gets everybody's comments. So we're not giving the CE or the CIO or CTO, Chief Technology Officer, just the folks in IT. And we're not giving the Chief Marketing Officer just the marketing and salespeople, breaking it down, because what that would do is it would make it easier. The groups would be smaller, and it would make it easier because the tendency to know an individual is going to be higher. So we recommend strongly that everybody gets everybody's comments. So what does that do? Well, Now think about it. Most organizations, let's say we're talking about 1,000-person or even a 500-person organization, and you're talking about an average of 80% response rate. So that's 400 people commenting. And you're talking, in one of our surveys, at least, you're talking about 8 to 10 open-ended questions. So normally you're going to get several hundred pages of comments. Anywhere between 100 to 1,000 and more pages of comments on all of the different themes that were asked in the questionnaire. So for any one individual, of course, if they're not broken down by one's department, they're going to be able to read, scan, and go through and do the same exercise that we at TalentMap did, which was identify the themes. What is very difficult to do in that context is identify a single individual's comments in their group. First of all, a leadership team tends not to interact with them to identify those situations and conditions. That would be very rare for that to happen. And secondly, just the volume of the comments themselves doesn't lead themselves. It forces a way of looking at the document that holds the comments in a very different way than if it's just comments from 10 or 12 or even 50 people. So the size is what really drives the retention of anonymity. It's safety in numbers. You have so many comments to go through, it's very difficult, if not impossible. And when we've done this, we've never seen any retribution as a result. The safety lies in the numbers. Now, of course, the organization, if it's small enough, that would break down. And so in that particular case, then we recommend that there is no distribution of comments at all, even to senior leadership. Only the HR folks would get the basket of the full basket of comments. And we've had very good conversations with HR folks who are the sponsor of the service, and they take their responsibilities very, very seriously. So between TalentMap and the HR folks, we can get glean the insights from the comments that we need to glean. And the HR group and or working with us will provide themes in the same way that we talked about before, the themes using illustrative comments and the percentage of individuals ticking off each theme. And that's going to have to be the extent of it. That's because what I said before holds, in that protecting employees' anonymity trumps all in this particular case. But we still, with using this approach, we think, get as much of the best of both worlds as is possible. And you know what? If any of you out there have a better way to do this, hey, we're all ears. This is the way that we've come up with to solve this particular conundrum. So the last piece is, we also very highly recommend that we work with you to instruct readers, those who are going to have access to the comments, in terms of how to read them and how to interpret them. Because I'm afraid it's not as simple as opening a Word document or a PDF and reading the comments from beginning to end, because there is a lot of emotion at play. So what we have now is a list of do's and don'ts that essentially, I think, go beyond a little bit beyond common sense. Some of this really relates to the way the questions are asked, the context the questions are asked in. So what should the reader do? So assuming now that the person, whether it's somebody on the leadership team, somebody in HR, you have access to all those comments. How then should you read them, and what should you not do? Well, essentially, the first thing we need to understand is we need to step back as much as we can and divorce our emotional selves from this exercise. I'm saying that, but you know what? People can't do it. So it would be nice if people could, if you could do that, but the reality is that doesn't happen. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to understand that verbatim comments, at least in our surveys, are purposely skewed to the negative. So for example, on that senior leadership question that I showed you before, the question itself and the question around all of those dimensions around engagement is, how could your organization improve such and such? Why do we ask that question that way? Why don't we ask a more balanced question? We get this all the time. Why don't we ask a more balanced question around, What are the good attributes of senior leadership? What do they do well and what do they not do well? And the reason why we ask that, how could you improve, is we're looking for continuous improvement. Our objective in this entire survey exercise is to measure the level of engagement with an aim or an objective of improving it. And so, yes, we could look at, what does senior leadership do well? And you get all kinds of flowers thrown. Thank you for being so good. You're so wise. You're so beautiful. All that stuff. You know what? It makes people feel good, but there's not much you can do with that. And the feel good part, it's not that we don't want to make anybody feel good. The feel good part should come with, over time, showing the improvements. What we need from individuals is guidance, is direction in terms of what are the gaps in terms of that we can close, that we can work on to improve your engagement. So if I flip right back, I'm going to go back to my senior leadership slide. What we want to know here is, how can I get more of those folks who answered in the neutral, in the blue, over to green, to engage them? Because we also know, hidden behind the scenes on this one, is that leadership has a big impact on overall engagement. And so when we look at the trend in the quotes, well, nobody's clear on the shared vision, doesn't appear to have gelled as a team. Well, there's some direction. It's not the answer, but it's some direction that can start us off in terms of some conversation, right? So that's how we have to understand that those comments are purposely skewed to reveal those responses. And so, as so many people do, they read the comments because, statistics, it just doesn't resonate with them. But when they read that stuff, yeah, I know my people. I know the people here. And so they interpret the comments as the reflection or the perspective of the organization, which nothing could be further from the truth. It's because essentially the comments, if you just read the comments, you're going to get a skew to the negative. It's not the true picture. The statistics, the measurement of the attitude provides the picture. The comments provide the answer as to why the picture is what it is. The second is a tactic that I've seen work very well. Instead of reading the comments as a book, as a novel, I'll flip the don'ts over here so you can see. Reading the comments like a novel, people love to get their hands on this and start reading it as if this was your latest detective novel, and all because the comments reveal characters, and it can read like a novel, but that's exactly what not to do. Yes, those comments can be really juicy. You got an example, right? That's not the way to read these comments. What we're looking for here is behavior change. We're looking for hints around behaviors that we can identify and change. And in doing so, we will have an impact on, in this case, leadership, which it will have an impact on engagement. So as I instruct people when we do our 360 evaluations where the comments are having even more of an impact and there is no anonymity, take a highlighter and go through the comments and identify the behaviors, right? And ignore what we call the characterizations. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back to our lady who's very stressful. I think it's a lady, I'm not sure. So when we're looking at the comments, you know what we gravitate to is, oh my gosh, she's mean, abusive, acts like a bully. The team lead for the area of the program that I assist is useless. That's what we glob onto. If we're reading this like a novel, that's exactly the kind of comment that's going to stick in our craw, especially if we're the one that the person's talking about. But that's not usually the case. Even third parties are going to love this stuff because it's juicy, and that's what we remember. But you know what? What we counsel is ignore it. That's not the helpful part of this comment. And so what we need to do is we need to take a highlighter and look in that comment, read the comment, scan it for behaviors that illustrate why that person is making those characterizations. So the person is concluding that their manager is mean, abusive, and acts like a bully. That doesn't help the manager. That doesn't help anybody. It just basically, it hurts. It provides an emotional chasm. However, there is a little bit of tidbit in there as to behaviors that might change. And that's in green. Management listens only to one individual on my team because she's worked with the organization for 33 years. There's a behavior, now that I'm aware of it, I can change that. I don't need to know that the person thinks that I'm mean, abusive, acts like a bully, or you know what, someone else is useless. That's their characterizations. That's of absolutely no use in this context. As a matter of fact, it's counterproductive. So what we say, ignore it, scratch it out, blot it out, ignore it when you're scanning the comments. And of course, you're doing this quickly. You're not reading this like a novel, right? So as you're doing this quickly and you're looking at a lot of comments because you've got a big pile in front of you, scan it for the recurring issues and broad themes across many comments. Don't glob on to one or two. Our human nature will be, you know what, we're going to look at the comments that are a little bit longer, have a little bit more depth, or a little bit more articulate, because that makes for entertaining reading. However, there's going to be a lot of short little comments that provide those behaviors just as well, and the recurring issues. So when we see a recurring issue, like we saw before with the senior leadership team, they don't gel, that recurred. So there you saw one comment, but there were many just like it. You saw that there was not a clear vision. You saw that there was a new CEO, right? Those are the things that were recurring time and time again, said in different ways for sure, but you could use reading that, scanning that, you saw that theme. That's what you glob onto. That's the point. I identify those behaviors. And now you can use this to start a conversation. So when you convene your group and you see, okay, one of the reasons why our senior leadership team has issues is, they only appear to listen to only one individual. What gives, group, what gives you that impression? And we start that conversation, right? So it really is around identifying the behavior. What shouldn't we do? Well, of course, I've been talking about, you don't read the comments like a novel. Yes, it could be really juicy, but that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we're identifying behaviors. Of course, we don't identify the individual comment authors. You know what? Of course, that's stating the obvious. Everybody's still going to try and do it. Everybody's going to still do it, even trying not to do it. But we have to understand that's a big no-no. Don't do it. Stay away from it. It doesn't matter. And of course, the juicier the comment, the more we're going to try to to guess and identify the individual. And finally, essentially, you never interpret the comments as a reflection of the prevailing view on a specific issue. So even though you saw on the senior leadership slide that, yeah, they're a new CEO, that's not the prevailing view necessarily, right? The prevailing view is that 46% of folks are neutral. The new CEO provides us an avenue as a reason why, but it's not the be all and end all. If the comments are overtly negative, if you come away from reading or scanning the comments and you get this big black cloud, oh my goodness, we're so bad in this organization, that's not the prevailing view. Remember, the comments are skewed to the negative. Go back to the statistics and say, okay, 29% are favorable, but I didn't see 29% of favorable comments, did I? I saw a lot of negativity in those comments. I saw a lot of uncertainty in those comments. It's the statistics that provide the prevailing view. That's the accurate measurement of the attitude. The comments only tell us why, and not in the same numbers. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to tell you here, or recommend, maybe not tell, is don't ever, ever, ever act on a single or isolated comment. So even though someone looks at this and is very striking and it's very emotive, if I'm the manager that's working with this comment, or I know, if I read this comment and that happens to be a theme, the manager only listens to one person, well, I'm not going to change my behavior based on a single comment. Although we're tempted to, if it's a powerful comment. You need to see what the theme is. You need to see what those recurring issues are. And when you see those recurring behaviors, then you start to think about how to change behavior as a result, either on an individual basis, but this is more of a 360 type of exercise, or on a global basis, on an aggregate basis. So I'm hoping in the last 40 minutes or so, I've given you a little bit of insight in terms of how to look at comments, how to read comments, how to not to read the comments, how to manage that conundrum. So on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Natalie, who's going to take us through some of the questions. I do believe there's some questions, and I'll do my best to give you a coherent response. Natalie.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Norm. We do have a few questions that have come in, but I also want to give everyone a couple minutes to submit any questions if they still have them in mind. And while more questions are coming in, I do have a couple of things I'd like to mention. So we've been working very hard here at Talent Map to provide additional resources for our clients and our followers. We regularly post new articles on our blog each week that provide tips, tricks, and a look at industry trends, as well as thought leadership pieces to keep you in the loop. We also recently built a resource library where you can find more in-depth content pieces, including downloadable how-to guides, checklists, and info sheets to help you guide your employee engagement initiatives. We have upcoming events and other learning sessions. So the first one is our next upcoming webinar in June. We're actually joining Kudos to talk about employee engagement and recognition. So we'll be talking about how you can promote praise in your workplace and how that influences engagement. So you can take a look at our website under the resource section to find that webinar. We'll also be sending the link to register in the follow-up email with the webinar recording and slides. We will also be at the SHRM 2018 annual conference in Chicago next month. So if you're attending, we'd love to see you. We'll be at booth 2457, I believe. So be sure to look for us and say hello. And then we will also be at the OMAA Fall Workshops in October. And then one final note before I jump into the questions is that we've recently published Employee Engagement and Action Planning for Dummies. So if you haven't ordered your copy yet, you can go to our website at talentmap.com/dummies, and the book is free, but there is a shipping charge, but you can waive the shipping costs by using the promo code available on this slide. It is Take Action, so make sure you order your copy. So now that that's all said, we can jump into questions now. We have a lot, so bear with us. So first question for you, Norm, is from Angela. She's wondering, what are some other considerations for deploying employee engagement surveys and handling comments in organizations that have under 100 employees?
Thank you, Angela. Very good question. We have to be extremely careful because an organization of 100 employees is almost like a big family, and pretty much everybody knows everybody in an organization that size, even if some people are remote. So the interactions are such that any situation, any condition that's referred to by an employee could be a way for someone to be identified. So in this particular case, what we would recommend is actually no distribution of the comments beyond HR. So HR would see the comments, they'd go under lock and key, and then there would be an exercise to theme those comments, and the managers, the individuals in the organization would have to be content with those themes, with a little bit of guidance from HR, who would have read through the comments, as well as TalMap. We're your partners in this, or we would be your partners in this, to give a little bit of a flavor verbally. But in an organization of 100 people, very, very dicey to distribute any comments without any fear of retribution. You can clean them as much as you want. You can remove personal names. You can remove titles. Those are some of the things that we do here as well. I didn't mention them explicitly, but some of that care is taken. It's not those things that identify individuals. It is situations and conditions, and sometimes even writing styles, especially in other languages like French or Spanish. The writing style can give someone away. So that's why we're very judicious about that. So next question.
Yep. The next question is from Kwame. Sorry if I am pronouncing it wrong. He's wondering whether Talent Map uses a text analyzer to categorize employee comments.
Yes, we have. We do. We have in the past, and actually we're developing our own right now. What we find with text analytics, we've used a number of pieces of software, is text analytics still doesn't give us the proper nuance. They've been developed primarily for the customer world, in which if somebody's talking about diapers, then there's keywords that will occur time and time again if you're buying diapers. You know, absorbency, soiling, those things tend to recur very, very often. In an employee survey, the technology has not evolved yet to capture the nuance in many cases. So, for example, you'll get a lot of the word communication. It tends to be a word that's used a lot in this context. And so a text analytics program will lump all of the times it sees communication or phrases around communication into a single group. And you will lose a lot of the nuance between what type of communication, when the communication is, why the communication isn't so good. So it still takes the human eye. That being said, artificial intelligence is coming along very, very quickly. And we here at Talent Map are actually working in that domain to improve using AI to improve the machine's capability to read the context. So we're prototyping some things. We're going to be ready probably early 2019 with a beta version of a word cloud and text analytics program that is learning. So we're not releasing it yet because it's still reading all these comments, learning it. The human eye is helping the machine distribute the proper nuancing, but right now we're not using it to a great extent yet because it doesn't capture the nuance. So next question now.
Perfect. So the next question is from Tanny. Her question is, what if there are several characterizations in multiple comments? Doesn't this need to be interpreted as behavior that needs to be flagged to leadership as a problem? She can understand one or two comments out of the blue, but if characterizations themselves start forming a theme, shouldn't they become something that needs to be addressed?
The characterizations, well, first of all, I'm not quite sure how you can address someone who's making a characterization without identifying that individual. So, and that goes completely against the spirit of what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to identify and single out individuals. So even in the comment that I showed you, the characterization is very strong, but yet that individual is protected just as like any other individual. And they probably made those characterizations because of that anonymity. So just because that person mouthed off, for lack of a better phrase, doesn't give anybody license to go and provide and give retribution. If there's a number of characterizations common, what we have to still, characterizations, what they are is essentially the individual's conclusion of a personality or a character based on certain behaviors. It's only the behaviors that are going to change that. So we're not providing any service to any individual or group of individuals by adhering or appeasing those characterizations. So even if, and we see this quite a bit, especially in large organizations where you have in groups that are going to really be dissatisfied and criticize a senior leadership team, and they'll call them everything under the sun. None of that's helpful. The only thing that's helpful in that exercise is understanding the specific behaviors that led to those characterizations. That can change. And so that's why we focus on identifying and instructing on the behaviors. The characterizations, in most cases, oftentimes, all they do is they're hurtful. When you hurt somebody emotionally, you're not going to inspire them to change. It's when we identify a specific changeable behavior and we provide positive encouragement that that behavior is going to result in positive change, that the individual will change the behavior. By just pointing out that 50 people call them useless, you know what? That's not really very helpful. Yes, it is a sign that there might be problems, but we can't go after those 50 people either. We still have, we still guaranteed everybody anonymity. So that's our approach. Feel free to disagree. So next question, Nat.
So the next question is from Siman. Their question is, what strategies do you suggest for avoiding senior management's requests for reviewing breakdown comments?
Good one. Essentially, we've run into this in the past, and what we would recommend, if there's a suspicion amongst the HR team that leadership is going to insist on breaking down those comments, first of all, if it's a very large organization, we're talking 5,000, 10,000 employees, and you got very large departments, you can still break it down by department and still have that safe anonymity. You still have numbers there. But if it's a smaller organization, and breaking down those comments is really going to provide a window for those leaders to make guesses as to who might have said what, then what we would do, and what we've done in the past, is we would recommend that we would not share the comments with the organization, and we would write that into the contract. So we would be the custodians of those comments at TalentMap, but we would not provide them back. And so we would do the theming on our end and then provide those themes. So where this has become an issue, if anybody, and I believe quite a few of you work in government or the public sector, is for, I think the federal term is A-tipping, so access to information. So if someone makes an access to information request on the survey comments, they might be forced to publicize them. So, of course, we don't want that to happen. That jeopardizes the anonymity we're seeking. So that's an example of not just senior leadership asking for a breakdown of results, but the public asking for those results as well. So we have to keep that in mind. So one of the ways we can do that is actually write into the contract that we'll ask the comments, but they'll stay at TalentMap. So next question, please.
Perfect. Next is a clarifying question from Jane. So Jane asks, when you said that TalentMap goes through comments and creates categories, are the categories defined after or before reading the comments? For example, are they both?
We do both. So in the questionnaires themselves, in our standard questionnaire, I mean, we've asked these questions so many times that we've established a number of very common categories. So what we do is we ask people to self-categorize their comments. So for example, if they're asking about senior leadership, then there'll be a subsequent question to that that says something to the effect of, in which of the following categories do you feel your comment applies? And there'll be categories like improved communication, improved leadership skills, themes that we've seen recur time and time again. So there is that self-categorization, but then we'll also look through the comments themselves, because like I said before, just that self-categorization, they're so generic, we don't get enough insight from them. So we will read the comments and we'll identify then nuances, or maybe there's another theme that emerges that really cross-cuts, something like that. So it's a bit of a shortcut in order to help us with that characterization, or the categorization, not characterization. But you still need to read the comments. Someone needs to read the comments to glean that insight. Next question.
Okay, I think this will be our last one. This one goes back to balance questions and skewing negative comments. So this one's from Martha. Her question is, what about the concept of building on success and reinforcing good behavior by asking about what is going well?
That's a very good question, Martha. And yes, but we have to do that carefully, because what we know is if we ask a generic question about what's going well, what do you like, what's positive, if we ask it in that vein, we get a lot of self-congratulations, or congratulations of the leadership team, or congratulations of the organization, or things like great job, keep it up, all of those types of things. Remember, when employees, or anybody for that matter, anybody respond in answering a survey, is doing this on the fly. They're doing it quickly, right? Some people will take the time to give a very, very thoughtful comment. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. And so when we're asking the positive thing, we have to be very specific in terms of the behaviors that we're looking to find positive behavior, or sorry, very specific in terms of what we want in terms of the positive behavior. So we have to phrase the question a lot more specifically. People are very good at criticism, they're very good at citing things to improve, but thinking about specifics in terms of what went well. So if we're talking about a change, or I'm thinking of a recent questionnaire that we did, we're talking about a specific change initiative. Well, we want to know what specific strategies would you consider repeating in such and such a change initiative? Well, that's a very specific question, and somebody will talk about the behaviors that then we can emulate. So yes, we do want to, we're not ignoring the positive, far from it, but we do need to be careful that when we're looking for the positive aspects and the strengths to build on, that we understand that we need to be very specific in the articulation of the question. Okay. So, Natalie, I'm not sure if we've got another time for any more. We're at the top of the hour, so.
Yeah, that is all the time we have. So I guess we will end it there. So thank you, everyone, for all your questions. As a reminder, the recording of the webinar and slide deck will be posted on the website early next week, and we'll be sure to email you directly once it's available. So that's it. Thank you, Norm, for taking the time to present, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope you'll join us again.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day.